So it's a little crazy. Testing.
Okay, so can you show me what it's doing? So when I want to show the PowerPoint,
Station myself over here.
okay.
That way, if there's any problems, you can switch to this first. Switch to this first, and then to the PowerPoint. Okay, and I have it running in windowed mode. When it goes full screen,
Okay.
crashes the application, kills the live stream.
Okay.
Okay.
So you clicked on this little thing?
Click PowerPoint.
And then you click on that little red thing?
No, right down here. You see the mouse
right here. Okay.
Okay. So you have the option of keeping it on the slideshow most of the time if you want.
Yeah, I'm going to do that.
Okay. So everything is then set up.
So here's my question though. When the camera's on me, like how would I go back to putting the camera on me?
It's this application here.
That thing. Okay. So when the camera's on me, what's in the screen? So anyway, there's all this stress. Oh, I'll wait till he's done. Sorry. So there's stress from changes in our finances. There's stress from, that's going to make me crazy, that echo. So it wasn't echoing a second ago, and now it's echoing. Okay, I'll just deal with it. There's stress from the social isolation that a lot of our parents, our families experience, because sometimes it's just easier to stay home than to deal with the nasty comments that we often encounter in our less than compassionate communities. And it's just, sometimes it feels like too much work. So we, on top of the financial stress and the medical stress, we also have stress from social isolation. And then it's also the newness of working with our children and their new diagnoses, and dealing with the tantrums, dealing with the fact that many of them don't sleep through the night. My daughter, she only needs to sleep for about 3 or 4 hours a night, and she's fine with that, but I am not fine with that. I need more sleep. So that was a tremendous stressor for us. And then often the feeding and eating problems that come along with autism are just a tremendous source of stress. So, you know, when we talk about autism, it really is affecting the entire family. And similarly, research has now been broadened so that we're not just doing research on the person who's diagnosed with autism, but we're really looking at the entire extended family, and not just for looking at I'd say maybe 5 years ago we were doing some studies about caregiver stress and mom stress and dad stress and sibling stress, but now we're really looking at the genetics of the parents, the genetics of the siblings. So whereas we used to just focus on the kids with autism, now we're really looking beyond that individual child and looking at the whole family, particularly at siblings. So I want to talk a little bit about siblings because we've had a lot of new information about siblings. We know that siblings have once there's one child in the family diagnosed with autism, additional children have a much higher rate of being diagnosed with autism than the general population. So we know that in the general population it's 1 in 68. In siblings it's around 1 in 15 to 1 in 20 who will be diagnosed with autism. And then in addition to meeting the threshold for a diagnosis of autism, a lot of the siblings also show what we call broader autism phenotype, which means they have some symptoms of autism, but not necessarily enough to qualify for a full diagnosis. But that doesn't mean that they don't also need supports, that they don't also need services. Sometimes they may need speech therapy, but not ABA therapy. But we just have to keep an eye on other siblings because of what we've learned through the research. I also want to say, before I talk about, you know, the negative things that impact the siblings, I want to just put in a plug for the siblings, because what we have seen is that the younger siblings of, are you a sibling? Is that your mom? I see her looking at you with tremendous pride. The younger siblings, I'm a sibling, and so people think I understand what it's like to be the sibling of a person with autism. But my brother was diagnosed in the 1960s. And in the 1960s, we put our people with autism were in institutions. And there was so much stigma associated with autism that really we didn't even talk about it. Very, very different than what my younger daughter experienced. I have 2 daughters. The older one's diagnosed with autism. The younger one, I like to say, is diagnosed with empathy. She grew up in a household where it was absolutely common for therapists to be parading in and out of the house at all times of the day. Some of them I would give a key if I wasn't home from work yet, like just let yourself in, make some coffee. You know, they pretty much lived in my house, and that's what my daughter experienced. And when she was in kindergarten, and the kindergarten teacher went around the room and said, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, I want to be a ballerina, I want to be a fireman. My daughter said, I want to be an ABA therapist. And she has grown up now wanting to be in the helping professions. And we see that among many of the siblings. They love their siblings so much, and they grow up and they become, they join the helping professions. They become nurses, they become doctors, they become therapists, they become occupational therapists, they work in schools, they become special education teachers. And this is such a wonderful thing. I mean, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about the research about siblings, but I want to preface it by saying the siblings are mostly doing pretty well. So we do have to keep an eye on our siblings, though, because what we have seen is that they are at risk for other psychiatric issues based, on the complicated genetics of autism. The genes that cause autism are also associated with schizophrenia and ADHD and other psychiatric disorders. So we just have to keep a close eye on our other kids. We tend to keep a very, very watchful eye on our children who are diagnosed with autism, but we just need to make sure we're focused on our other children as well. So new research is showing that by the time I hate the term unaffected siblings, I'll say undiagnosed siblings, turn 3, we can start to see some initial problems. So even if they don't meet the criteria for autism, they still may need to have some supports and services, some speech therapy, some in-school therapy. And then at 7 years, we also see some additional areas of concern. We see lower adaptive functioning scores, increases in repetitive behaviors, some language problems, and also some associated anxiety. We've been studying the baby siblings of people with autism now for the last 15 years. We did that because we knew that this was an enriched population. As I said, we know that in the general population, 1 in 68 children are going to be diagnosed with autism, but among younger siblings, it's 1 in 15 or 1 in 20. So if we are able to study them from birth or even before birth and follow them, the idea was we might start to, this would be an enriched population, 1 in 15 of the siblings enrolled in this study would go on to have autism, and we might be able to identify some of the earliest signs and symptoms of autism that then we could use to add to our collection of early warning signs. So we've been looking at the genes in baby siblings. We've been trying to find, what do the siblings who go on to be diagnosed with autism, what does their behavior look like at 6 weeks of age, 3 months of age, 1 year of age, and what can we learn from that? And here are some of the things that we've learned. I think most of you probably know the traditional early warning signs of autism. I always like to say them because the CDC, they're always saying, learn the signs, but then when they go out and talk, they just say, learn the signs. And I always think, why don't you tell people what the signs are? So here are the signs. Babies should have big smiles and joyful expressions by 6 months of age. Babies should be doing back and forth sharing. They should be smiling. They should show facial expression by 9 months. They should be babbling by a year. That's the ba, 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 ga, ga, goo, goo. Babies should do that. My daughter never babbled. She just went right from no speech to echolalic full sentences. So when her pediatrician said, does she have any words? I said, oh, she speaks in full sentences. But what he didn't ask me was, are they novel sentences? Are they appropriate to the conversation? Had he asked me that, I would have said, no, she just recites lines from Sesame Street, right? So we want to see babbling. Skipping to words is not a good thing. So we should see pointing, showing, waving bye-bye, all of those communicative gestures we should see in babies by 12 months. Babies should have words by 16 months, and they should have 2-word phrases by 24 months. And anytime there's regression or loss of speech, or the child was babbling and doesn't move on to words, that's also a red flag. The next 4 are really new early warning signs, red flags, that came out of the research through the Baby Siblings Consortium. One is babies should respond to their name. This is one that I know a lot of parents described, and it was actually because parents reported this anecdotally that the Baby Siblings Consortium actually looked into this. And what they found is that a lot of kids who go on to be diagnosed with autism do not respond to their name. But we know that they can hear because if you put a Sesame Street video on and they hear Elmo, they come running. So response to name is a particular communicative act, and babies should be responding to their name. The next one is a motor uh, red flag, where a lot of the babies, when you pull them up to sitting, their head does not stay stiff. So typically when you pull a baby up from lying on the floor by his or her arms, they'll stay stiff and the head will come up. In our kids with autism, what we're seeing at 6 months is their head sort of is leaning back. So that's another early warning sign that we learned through baby sibs. And then the last three, which I'm going to speak about at a little bit greater length, are differences in the size and shape of the brain that we can see prenatally and in the first 6 months of life, and also unusual patterns of eye gaze, where the babies are not looking, babies who go on to be diagnosed with autism are not looking at the same things in a visual field that typical children are. So before I talk about those, I just want to say if anyone's interested in more information about early warning signs of autism, I highly suggest a website called the Autism Navigator. The Autism Navigator has videos that show typical toddler behavior versus red flag behavior for lots of different behaviors across different ages. So if anyone has a concern about a behavior that his or her child is showing, you can try to find this on the Navigator, and you can see what typical behavior should be at that age. And secondly, they have a great video glossary. So if there are terms that you are not sure about, like echolalia or proprioception, or these words that we all learn by the time our children are 20, but we don't necessarily know when our children are first diagnosed, I would highly recommend the glossary. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these biomarkers that we found based through the Baby Siblings Research Consortium. The first was we saw physical changes in the brains of children who went on to be diagnosed with autism at 6 months of age. And the reason this is so important is because typically when we diagnose autism, we have to wait until we see behavioral signs. And that is usually at around age 2, 2.5, 3, right? That's when the behavioral symptoms emerge. But if we could find an early biomarker, even a birth biomarker, we would be able to begin early intervention services at birth. And maybe the most debilitating aspects of autism would never emerge in the first place. So that's why we're searching so hard for these biological biomarkers. And one of them is that as I said, we see differences in the structures of the brain in children at 6 months of age before behavioral symptoms are seen in the kids who go on to be diagnosed with autism. So they have different sizes of certain areas of their brains. There are different pathways that are connecting different regions of their brains, and they also show a greater amount of cerebral spinal fluid. So the fluid that is between the brain and the skull, the bone. The kids who go on to be diagnosed with autism have more fluid. And secondly, the eye gaze biomarkers we see even earlier. By the time the kids are just 1 month of age, if we show them videos, the kids who go on to be diagnosed with autism are looking at different parts of the screen than the kids who are typically developing. So on this particular, I don't think I can reach that, that's too tall. So the kids who are typically developing, when they are looking at a video or a scene, you can see in column B, where that blue dot is over the woman's face, the dot is over her eyes. So typically developing children, when they're looking at a person or watching a video, they're looking at that person's eyes. And the eyes are really the area where so much social information is communicated. So here, for example, if I were to cover my eyes and you didn't get to see my eyes while I was speaking, you would miss a lot of what I was saying because you would be missing my body language. Now, our kids with autism are looking at the mouth. They're not looking at the eyes. They're only looking at the mouth. So as you can see in column A, that red dot, which is kids with autism, they're focused on the mouth. We think that's because the mouth is the point of audio-visual synchronization, and they tend to be interested in things that move and why they move. But by looking at the mouth, they're missing all of the non-verbal portion of communication. So I want to talk a little bit more about the important role that siblings play. We've known for, oh my gosh, the last 15 years that 4 times as many boys are diagnosed with autism as girls. And for years we thought that that meant that there was something about being male that conferred risk for autism. But what we've learned in the last few years through all of the genetics research that we've been doing is that the genes that cause autism are actually equally distributed in boys and girls, right? So if 4 times as many boys have autism, we would expect to see the autism genes much more often, 4 times more often, in boys than girls. But that's not what we see. We see them equally distributed. So there's this cohort of girls who have deletions or duplications in their genome that should cause autism, that would cause autism if they were boys. But in these girls, they have no clinical symptoms of autism. So this has really changed the way we think about autism and genetics, because instead of thinking somehow being male confers risk, now we're thinking maybe being female confers protection. And if we can figure out what it is that's protecting these girls from developing the clinical symptoms of autism, then maybe we can harness that protective factor and use it to protect both the boys and the girls. So we have launched a project at the Autism Science Foundation in conjunction with Mount Sinai Hospital, the University of California at San Francisco, the Broad Institute at MIT, and the University of Illinois at Chicago, called the Autism Sisters Project. And the idea here is to develop a cohort of girls, of unaffected female siblings of people with autism, to study their genes and find girls who have the genes that should cause autism, a SHANK3 deletion, a contactin2 deletion, whatever, and figure out what else these girls have in common that's protecting them from developing the clinical features of autism. And the best news...
No, Donna.
One of the best pieces of news is now we can collect DNA. We don't even have to take blood anymore. We can collect this DNA through a saliva sample. So I want to just show a quick video about the Autism Sisters Project. Hope that works. Okay, so the sound is not working. Okay, I'm gonna re-rock. Here we go. Okay.
We could make a drug, we could invent new therapy, and that wouldn't just help the people who are affected with autism, we would help those down the road who are at risk for autism diagnosis. So we are building a database of the siblings, the female siblings of people with autism, to try to search for this female protective effect. We think the more families we have, the better our results will be. To be able to engage siblings, brothers, sisters, knows and understands him in a way that nobody else does. I was excited to participate in the project because I love my brother and because the Autism Sisters Brothers seems like an amazing opportunity. It just gives me a lot of hope to see Evie participate in this project where siblings come together as a family. It gives the siblings such a positive message about autism. It's so easy to participate in this project. We don't even have to give blood anymore. We can collect your DNA through a saliva sample. We need people who will give us spit for autism. They come into the clinic, they will complete several thinking games and language games on the computer. They'll fill out some forms, and then we'll do some assessments in person as well.
Open time when I do them online. People may not be able to trial in the second wave study.
Honestly, it's so fun participating in your crowd because it's so straightforward and simple. You just have to get a little bit, go to a certain line, and then you're done. The Autism Sisters Project is a very big and very challenging project. We need as many families as possible to contribute DNA, and we need as many families as possible to contribute funds so that we can analyze that DNA. If we can isolate the female protective effect, it can really change the way our loved ones live with autism. The Autism Sisters Project will change the science of autism because we're looking at factors that confer resilience and possibly protection. I don't want to change that rather, but it's really exciting that I can do autism. I know I definitely will. And by participating in the Autism Sisters Project, I'm getting one step closer. Give a spit, give a spit, give a spit for autism. I gave a spit for autism, and you can too.
To learn more, visit autismsistersproject.org.
So for those of you who want to give a spit,
This is some more information. You can go to autismsistersproject.org. The one benefit is that you are so close to Mount Sinai Hospital, and that is currently one of our biggest collection sites. No, the sister can be older or younger.
does anyone else?
The twin sister is ideal.
A twin sister would be great. Okay. E. No, that's not what I want to do. Escape. Okay. Okay. Okay, so another important research project that has been launched in the last couple of years is the Autism Brain Net. So when we think about how other disorders and diseases have been solved, it's by studying the affected organ, right? So if you have heart disease, we need to look at your heart. If you break your foot, we need to look at your bones in your feet. In autism, we need to be able to look at the brain. But people need their brains. So we have started a project together with 4 universities, the University of California at Davis, University of Texas Southwestern, again, Mount Sinai, because we love Mount Sinai, and Beth Israel in Boston. Soon we'll be adding Oxford University as the first international site. But this is a network of universities that are working together to collect post-mortem brain tissue from people with autism. And the idea, as I said, is because we need to be able to study the affected organ, and in autism, that's the brain. So what we know so far about the role of the brain in autism is that, you know, the brain is made up of billions of neurons and hundreds of trillions of connections. And we know that in kids with autism, the cells are not going to the places where they are supposed to be going. As I said earlier, we know from the baby SIBS work that the kids have different sizes of certain areas of their brains. They have a different amount of fluid. And even at the cell level, the cells are not getting to the places they need to be. And the connections between cells are not forming properly in the brain. So this is what may be leading to our children experience the sensory processing issues that so many of them experience, where they're overwhelmed by sounds, they're overwhelmed visually when too much is going on, they're overwhelmed by too much motion in the area, and some of them are underwhelmed. Some of them need so much stimulation. But in any event, there are certainly sensory processing issues that we know are associated with autism. And we're also looking to see whether this may be responsible for some of the cognitive issues that we see associated with autism. We know that about 40% of kids with autism have intellectual disability, and we're trying to understand the relationship not only at the genetics level, where we know that many of the genes that are associated with autism are also associated with intellectual disability, but looking at the neuron level and at the level of the brain about what can we understand about cognitive issues. So I'm going to now show a little video about this new project called the Autism Brain Net. We are encouraging families to think about registering to donate postmortem brain tissue, just the way you would think about donating organs. You know, you don't think about donating an organ at the time when someone has had an accident. You think about it well before. So that's what we're asking people to do with regard to thinking about postmortem brain tissue. So let me see if I can get this one to play. So I'm having the same audio problem, I think.
Can't talk. But he says so much with his expression. He's looking at you, something's wrong.
He's saying today, I believe him to be a better person, a better mother, and I think he's a better human being.
They've always been, inclusive of Casey, they're all part of it.
They're really good boys. They really are.
Some of the challenges my girl and I have faced,
It breaks our heart, and it only kind of hyper focuses on the fact that we're the only ones that we know with him. And we have no help, we have no support, we have no respite.
autism has changed when we weren't. We've become very, homebound.
I think unfortunately our pain makes people uncomfortable. I think initially it was all about awareness and understanding and compassion, but I think that was only partially based on research.
Bring that program, the brain tissue resources that are needed throughout the world.
How do you learn anything unless you have specialists learn from? Research is the way life works. How do we find cures? How do we make them happen?
I had when you sign up when you start a card on the back, it basically gives you everything that's not labor on that. When you pray, you take your eyes, you take your heart, you want to your kidneys, you put it thought, your brain, you separate.
As a parent of a child on the autism spectrum, I think we all have a role to participate in autism research.
We don't care when officers say research, why is there not? We don't do all that.
Everyone should sign up and participate in research by registering to donate brain tissue. Sign up. Do it. Nothing's most likely going to happen to their child today or
Okay, how do I get back to? All right. So registering to donate brain tissue is a big decision. We don't expect you to make a decision while sitting in this room to donate brain tissue, but I would hope that everyone would be interested in learning more about the research that we have been able to accomplish because of brain tissue. So these cards are just to sign up to get a quarterly e-newsletter about brain tissue. So I'm going to pass these out.
And hopefully everyone will sign up to get more information. I promise you, by filling out this card, you are not donating anyone's brain.
But as I said, we need to do these studies so that we can search for biological markers. Biomarkers are really one of the holy grails. We want to be able to diagnose autism before behavioral symptoms are seen. And we've learned a lot already from the work that we've done with brain tissue and with fMRI studies. So what we've seen in this graph, just very briefly, what we're seeing is that the brains of kids with autism are used differently when the kids are looking at faces versus objects, right? So we know that our kids tend to prefer objects over people. Now we have good evidence that they're actually using different parts of their brains when they're looking at objects versus faces as compared to typical individuals. And here you can see that we can see these differences in the way the brain functions when looking at faces versus objects in babies as young as 6 months of age. So again, this is another opportunity for us to have an early biomarker that would lead a child into early intervention services a good 2.5 to 3 years before typically they're able to receive services based on behavioral symptoms. So those are the forms that I passed out, and I hope everyone will fill one out. I want to talk a little bit about beyond genes, because we know that autism is genetic and that there's genetics have a very large role to play in autism, but it's not all genetics. Genetics really interact with the environment in causing autism. So we've learned through research in the last couple of years that exposure to high levels of air pollution, certain types of infections, maternal infections during pregnancy, including infection with rubella, or even now there's a study that showed infection with flu during pregnancy could be a risk factor for autism. Interestingly, flu shot during pregnancy did not cause autism, but infection with flu virus. So the regular full virus, not the attenuated virus in a vaccine. Exposure to certain pesticides and medications taken during pregnancy, including some types of medications for depression, have conferred additional risk. And there's some very new research looking at the microbiome that is looking at moms who take antibiotics while they're pregnant, and whether or not that sort of reconfigures the flora in their intestine, and whether that has some effect on the developing brains of the fetus. In terms of what does not cause autism, probably the best studied environmental factor with regard to autism is vaccines. We've been looking at whether vaccines cause autism now for, oh my gosh, almost 20 years. And study after study after study shows that there's no relationship between vaccines and autism. I would urge everyone here, if you have younger children, please get them vaccinated. Unfortunately, because of the misinformation that has been put out in the media, the younger siblings of kids with autism tend to be among the least vaccinated. So in addition to being at higher risk genetically for autism and at risk for other psychiatric disorders, now we are putting them at risk for infectious disease that we can prevent with vaccines. So I am very comfortable telling you that vaccines have been exonerated as a cause of autism. We've also been able to develop good evidence-based treatments over the years that have been validated by research, and that they're studied in a lab. Hi. Oh, thank you. So, of course, applied behavior analysis therapy is now the gold standard. There are many flavors of applied behavior analysis therapy, like, oh my gosh, pivotal response therapy, relationship development intervention, um, lots of good early start Denver model, Jaspers. There are lots of different types of applied behavior analysis therapy. And if you're interested in seeing the differences between those therapies, again, I would refer you to the Autism Navigator, where they've got great videos of each one of those therapies, and that really highlights the difference so that you can make a good choice for your child. Speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, social skills training. We've got two FDA-approved medications for symptoms associated with autism. Those are typically for anxiety and for irritability, aggression. We are working hard on medications that target the core symptoms of autism, which would be the social disability, language dysfunction. So that is underway. We've at the Autism Science Foundation, we are very much focused on trying to help develop medications that would target those core functions. And not that they sort of cure the autism, but they enable the kids to participate in therapy. So that's really the idea between trying to mediate some of that social dysfunction that prevents them from being present, not from being emotionally present during applied behavior analysis therapy. Oh, good. Risperidone, and I think risperidone, Risperdal. So when Eric London comes, he's going to talk all about the medications. And the other one is Wellbutrin, which is the non-generic name. Wellbutrin. That's an anti-anxiety medication that's approved for use in kids with autism. But risperidone is really for irritability and aggression. The idea behind risperidone is to try to enable the kids to participate in speech therapy or occupational therapy. It's not going to cure their autism, but it may make them better able to participate in the therapies that we know are going to help them.
My son was on it, did very well on it, but when we checked his blood, his prolactin level was too high, and had to take him off.
See, that's why we need more options. 2 is not enough, not by a factor of 1,000. Our kids are also different. To have 2 medications is ridiculous. So anyway, we are hard at work on that. And then we also, unfortunately, have many non-evidence-based treatments, many of which we have tried. We've put them through the rigors of double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, and they have failed, or the people who put them out in the world don't want to be bothered subjecting them to the rigors of clinical trial. Let me tell you, if there's a therapy, if there's a treatment that works, the person who discovered it should be banging down the door to have a clinical trial, right? Not saying, oh, I don't want to deprive people of access to this therapy. They should be banging down the door. So, some of these, I'm sure you've heard, music therapy and horseback riding. I'm a big fan of music classes. I love horseback riding, but these are not necessarily therapeutic for kids with autism. I think kids with autism should absolutely participate in them because they're fun and the kids may enjoy them. I went swimming with the dolphins and it was super fun. I think everyone should go swim with the dolphins, but I would be hard pressed to describe how swimming with the dolphins is going to change a brain-based disorder. We've looked at special diets. We've studied different types of diets. We've put kids on the gluten and casein-free diet and compared them to same age controls who are on a regular diet. And there is no difference in the kids who are on the gluten and casein-free diet, except that they show less bone density. So the lack of casein in their diet is not helping their bones are not forming in the way they should because of lack of calcium. Vitamin supplements, people say, you see on television all the time that this pill has as much vitamin C as 100 oranges. Like, the body's really not designed to eat 100 oranges, and maybe there's a reason for that, right? So some of these vitamins, a water-soluble vitamin is probably not going to hurt you, but these fat-soluble vitamins, if you take them at high enough levels, they can really do harm. Epsom salt bath, this is sort of a family of non-evidence-based treatments that I get emails about at least once a week. It has to do with leaching negative ions somehow out of the kids, that if you put certain salts in their bath and put them in the bathtub, the negative ions will leach out of their body and it will cure their autism. This is the same thing behind the snake oil. I went to an autism conference where they had a vendor fair, and someone was selling actual snake oil, and he said, pour it into the bath and it will leach the negative ions. Apparently autism is caused by negative ions. It's the same thing with, I don't think it's on here, the giant magnet. The giant magnet, this is something that a doctor tried to sell me at a time when my daughter was very young and I was very vulnerable. And I actually thought about it, and I went home and talked to my husband, and he said, are you crazy? Listen to yourself. But the idea here was I was supposed to buy this giant electromagnet and put it under her mattress. And during the night, the electromagnetic field was going to rearrange the ions in her brain and cure her autism. So, yeah. An Epsom bath salt is probably not going to hurt anyone, but secretin injections, that is a pig hormone that parents have tried injecting their kids with due to anecdotal stories on the internet that a child started speaking after being injected with pig hormone. Antifungal agents, bleach enema is, anyone who does the bleach enema, I think their child, we should call Child Protective Services. But there are families who are giving their children bleach enema to try to kill bacteria somehow in their colon. I don't want to talk about that. Chelation is the process of removing heavy metals from the body. It's a treatment that's based on a non-cause, which was the idea that certain preservatives in vaccines that contained mercury were causing autism. We've looked at vaccines that have mercury. We've looked at vaccines that don't have mercury. We've looked at kids who got vaccines with the thimerosal, without the thimerosal. There's no difference in their neurological function. So to chelate a child, to remove mercury, when you chelate, you also remove calcium, which is necessary for your heart to beat. A child in Pennsylvania was actually killed during the process of chelation because they chelated the calcium and he went into heart failure. A new one that I've gotten a couple of emails about is raw camel milk that you have to import from this one provider in Saudi Arabia because the camel milk has to be unpasteurized. If you use pasteurized camel milk, it's not going to work. So you must get it from this one provider. I would love to understand the underlying biological mechanism by which unpasteurized camel milk is going to cure autism. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy is another one that was very popular a few years ago. It was basically putting the kids in these oxygen tanks and exposing them to very high levels of oxygen. We have tested that therapy. There's no value to that therapy, but there have been several families who experienced burns because the tents catch on fire. And one father who was in the tent with his son was very badly burned. Fortunately, the child was not hurt, but I feel for that father who was burnt. Nicotine patch, I've heard as the cure for autism. Again, I would love someone to explain the underlying biological mechanism of nicotine patch. Ecstasy, like maybe for the mom. I don't know. No, not for the mom. And then we talked about the snake oil, but everyone laughs like, oh, this is snake oil. But someone actually tried to sell me snake oil. Yes.
One that I don't see up there, I guess it kind of goes along with the vitamin supplement. I've heard fish oil. You heard anything about that?
Yeah. Fish oil is one of the ones where it's probably not going to hurt. Plenty of people take fish oil. There's no science showing the mechanism by which fish oil is going to help. where I would draw the line on fish oil is we hear sometimes from families who think they're being scientific by saying, I'm going to try fish oil and I'm not going to do speech therapy or ABA therapy while I do the fish oil to see if the fish oil has any value. And that's where we say, no, don't do that. Do evidence-based therapies because every day is valuable in a malleable brain. Okay, so, sometimes we look at this list and you try to wonder, like, why do families do this? It's not because they're stupid. It's not because they don't love their children. Frankly, it's because they love their children, right? It's because as parents, we will do anything and everything to try to help our children. And it's also because there's sort of a history of our families being distrustful of science because of the way autism was first thought about back in the 1960s, which is that people thought mothers caused autism. And in fact, my mother was called a refrigerator mother when my brother was diagnosed. She was told that she was too cold and uncaring to take care of a child and that he would be better off without her. Right. So I think that whole idea that that's what doctors thought and that's what doctors said to us as parents, that has made a lot of families distrustful of science. We're also in a very desperate state when our children are first diagnosed. I remember I was very depressed. I felt desperate. I wanted to try anything. I almost threw down $299 for the giant electromagnet. And now I look at that and I'm like, where was I? I was depressed. I was like, I'll do anything. I think all of our families are like that. In many cases, what we're experiencing as parents with our children at home is not what the doctors are telling us we're supposed to be experiencing or we should be experiencing. And that also makes us distrustful of what the scientists are saying. And I don't know if you have experienced this, but sometimes you go to the doctor and talk about your kid and they're just like, no, you don't know. They sort of dismiss what you're saying. They don't really listen to you. And so parents don't feel like the doctors are listening to them or paying attention to the real and serious symptoms that they're describing. And again, this sort of leads to a situation of distrust between parents and scientists. It's also sort of hard to just accept the randomness, that how come my child is struggling and my neighbor's child is fine. So, that tends to make people distrustful. There's just, I call this autism overload, where there's just too much in the media now about autism. Everyone thinks they're an expert because they heard Jenny McCarthy on Oprah, who cured her son by putting a blue crystal on him. And, they say, oh, why don't you can cure your child if you put him on this diet? I think that's an issue. And then the internet. The internet is not necessarily our friend when it comes to autism. A study out of Yale showed that 50% of the information about autism online is wrong. So that means you are just as likely to get bad information as good information when you go online. Now, what that study showed was that the good sites tend to have suffixes of .org or .edu or .gov. Any autism site that has really a .com or that's selling product is one to kind of stay away from. But back to the internet, I love this quote. I don't know if you can read it, but it basically says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, right? People are saying things on the internet that they would never say in real life. They put up bad information and you don't really know who is putting this information out on the internet. So for example, you can go online, you can buy oxytocin for your child, which apparently, according to this website, cures autism. There's no scientific studies yet. Oxytocin is being studied, but there are no good studies yet that show that intranasal oxytocin is a cure for autism, and there's nothing to believe that you're actually getting oxytocin. So there's no dosaging that's been determined for oxytocin. You have no idea what you're going to get when you buy this bottle of oxytocin that is available on Amazon.com. But look, your satisfaction is guaranteed. It says clinically proven to reduce symptoms associated with autism when there's no scientific studies to back that up. So you really have to be careful of what you see on the internet. just in terms of, before I wrap up, I want to talk about, I talked about some things that we've learned in the last couple of years. These are some areas that we're focused on in this year and the next year. We're really looking at issues related to the microbiome. We want to understand more about prenatal factors and their contribution to risk. So we're looking at issues related to the microbiome. We're looking at pain response. So many parents have talked to us about the fact that their children don't seem to experience pain the same way as typically developing children. Many of them say that their kids are under responsive to pain. I know with my daughter, she fell down, broke her, her toe was swollen like Fred Flintstone, like whoa, whoa, whoa. And she was fine. She's walking around on her broken toe. I took her to the ER. The toe is broken, but she, it didn't faze her at all. So we have to understand about this. Is there a different pain response? Because we have to make sure that if there's a broken bone, it's treated, and that we're able to understand the pain profile of people with autism so that they can get attention. Medical marijuana is one that I recently moved off the list of non-evidence-based treatments onto the list of areas we need to study. There's been a lot of, again, parents are talking about, have given good anecdotal information about the fact that they think that in some cases medical marijuana has helped their kids. So what our responsibility is to subject it to the rigors of clinical trial. Look at not necessarily giving kids a joint, but the medication, it's endocannabinoid, the substance in marijuana that may have that calming effect, and see if it can withstand the rigors of clinical trial. And if it's proven to be efficacious, that's another option for some of our kids. We're also really focused on using new technology, studying new technology as ways to improve our kids' lives. One that I'm really excited about is with a product that's very much like a Fitbit, where we put this sensor on the wrists of the kids, and it can monitor their heart rate, their galvanic skin response. And what this does is and the teachers have on we do this in a classroom, and the teachers have something on their waist that has a connection to each child's wristband. So if a child is getting sort of headed towards a meltdown, getting agitated, the sensor on the teacher's belt will go off, and the teacher can intervene before the child has a full-blown meltdown, and hopefully that enables the child to stay in the classroom, to remain in the learning environment, and not have to be removed from the class, which so many of our kids spend so much time, walking the halls with the para to calm down. If we can try to, again, intervene, prevent these meltdowns from happening, then our kids are able to spend more time in class. And then another use of technology is trying to do telemedicine. So there are so many areas of the country where there are no ABA professionals, not enough speech therapists. So we're looking at ways to do these, to try to administer therapy using Skype or FaceTime, but testing to see if the outcomes are positive. Not just saying, well, you live in this part of the country, so too bad there's no therapist. We want to see if this is a realistic option, because it would open up the opportunity for therapy for so many more kids. So what can we as families do? Please participate in research through either the Autism Sisters Project, the Autism BrainNet. There are so many studies going on in New York, at Mount Sinai, at the NYU Child Study Center, up at Yale, at University of Pennsylvania. Our families participate in research, autism families in general, at a much lower rate than families who have kids with other types of diseases and disorders. And that has really been a rate limiting factor in our ability to advance the research. So on our website, we always have a list right on the homepage of studies that are enrolling new either families or individuals or siblings or moms. So please take a look at that and please participate in research. Please use evidence-based treatments. Don't subject, our kids are not guinea pigs. They deserve the benefit of evidence. That's why at the Autism Science Foundation, we invest so much in studies that are looking to try to validate these treatments, because we want our children to have the benefit of evidence. So please really think hard before exposing children to therapies that have huge risks and huge potential side effects. And then go to events. Here you are at an event. Good job. But we also need to raise money for research. So I'm just going to show one more quick video about an event that we have coming up in White Plains, which is not that far from here. We do our annual bike events called Ride FAR. FAR is for Autism Research. But we have, it's a bicycling event. We have a 4-mile route, an 8-mile route, a 20-mile route. And then for those of you who are crazy, we have a metric century, 60 miles. My husband's going to do that. Let me see if I can play this quick video. Someone want to go knock on the door? I'll go.
This has worked before.
Oh, yeah. All right, well, I guess I can just skip it.
You sure?
Oh, if you can get audio, that would be ideal. That's the old one.
There is sound, it's just really low.
Okay, well, look how much fun they all seem to be having.
It's very cracked out again.
Well, that's good. You can hear that.
Okay.
Family-friendly day, so whether you're an avid cyclist or just a beginner biker, this is the event for you.
We have 4 different routes.
I ride because my son is autistic and he is probably one of the greatest human beings that I know.
I ride to support autism research.
I have a cousin in Vietnam that has autism. I would like to dedicate this ride for him.
I'm here to ride with my friends, have fun, and support a great cause.
Today I'm riding for my cousin Dylan. He has autism. He's 13 years old.
I ride to support my daughter and all of the kids who are struggling to live with autism.
The number of children who are dealing with autism is increasing every year. 1 in 68 is facing an autism spectrum disorder.
So I think it's super important that people get informed as to what's going on with autism.
I'm an autism science researcher, and I've seen how much they've done for the community of people with autism, and it was really important to me to get out here and ride and try to raise as much money to support the foundation as I could.
If you want to have a terrific time on a beautiful October day, come on down to Wall Street Rides Bar in Saxon Woods Park in White Plains, Westchester County.
We specifically designed this event so that it's a family-friendly day, so whether you're an avid cyclist or just a beginner biker, this is the event for you.
We have 4 different routes going out today, from 4 miles all the way up to 62 miles, all to support ASF.
With your support, the Autism Science Foundation is able to fund critically needed autism research to to help us understand the causes of autism and develop better treatments for all of our family members. Your generous donation will make a tremendous difference.
Count me in.
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 Count me in. Count me in.
Count us in.
Count me in for the Wall Street Rides Far.
See you at the ride. For more information, visit wallstreetridesfar.org.
Okay. And resources if you're interested in getting more information about research. So that families can read them and understand them. Good information in there. Can I just go back to that? There's a picture of my Georgia Stone.